Margaret thought harassing a disabled child would drive the family away. She didn't know the little girl's grandfather was a retired CIA agent who specialized in making bullies disappear. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Martinez wheeled her daughter Emma down the pristine sidewalk of Willowbrook Estates. The 8-year-old girl's face lit up with excitement as she pointed at the beautiful houses with their perfect lawns and white picket fences. "Look, Mama. That house has a swing." Emma's voice carried pure joy despite the cerebral palsy that affected her speech slightly. "Yes, sweetheart. And that's going to be our new home," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. After years of saving every penny, she had finally managed to buy a small house in this neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it had a ramp for Emma's wheelchair and a backyard where her daughter could play safely. The moving truck was already there when they arrived. Sarah watched nervously as the movers carried their modest belongings into the house. Everything they owned could fit in one small truck, but to Sarah and Emma, it represented a fresh start and new hope. "Welcome to the neighborhood," a warm voice called out. Sarah turned to see a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes walking toward them. He was followed by a woman with a gentle smile. "I'm David Chin and this is my wife Linda. We live next door," he said, extending his hand. "Sarah Martinez and this is my daughter Emma," Sarah replied, shaking his hand gratefully. David knelt down to Emma's level. "Hi there, Emma. I bet you're excited about your new house." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. Mama says I can have my own garden." "That sounds wonderful," Linda said. "If you need any help settling in, please don't hesitate to ask." As the Chens walked back to their house, Sarah felt a warmth in her chest. Maybe this neighborhood would be different. Maybe here, Emma would be accepted and loved. But Sarah didn't notice the woman watching from across the street, her face twisted with disgust as she stared at Emma's wheelchair. Margaret Wellington had been the HOA president of Willowbrook Estates for 12 years. At 55, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, enforcing every rule and regulation with military precision. Her own house was a monument to perfection. Not a single blade of grass out of place, not one flower petal wilted. She prided herself on maintaining the standards of the community. Property values were her religion, and anything that didn't fit her vision of perfection was considered a threat. When she saw the Martinez family moving in, her jaw clenched. A single mother with a disabled child. In her neighborhood. This was not what she had worked so hard to build. Margaret immediately pulled out her phone and called her vice president, Robert Kim. "Robert, have you seen our new neighbors?" she said without preamble. "The Martinez family? They seem nice." "The little girl is adorable," Robert replied. "That little girl is disabled, Robert. Do you understand what this means for our property values? For our community image?" There was a pause. "Margaret, you can't discriminate against people because of disabilities. That's illegal." "I'm not discriminating," Margaret said coldly. "I'm protecting our investment. There are plenty of legal ways to encourage people to move if they don't fit in." It started small. A citation for Emma's wheelchair being parked on the driveway for more than 2 hours. Another citation for Sarah's car being 3 inches over the property line. A formal complaint about Emma's laughter being too loud during daytime hours. Sarah tried to comply with every ridiculous demand. She moved Emma's wheelchair to the garage. She measured her car's position with a ruler. She even asked Emma to play more quietly, breaking her own heart as she saw the confusion in her daughter's eyes. "But why can't I laugh, Mama?" Emma asked one evening, tears rolling down her cheeks. Sarah knelt beside her daughter's wheelchair and pulled her close. "You can laugh, baby. You can laugh as loud and as much as you want. Some people just don't understand how beautiful your laughter is." The citations kept coming. A fine for having a ramp that was not in compliance with neighborhood aesthetics. A complaint about Emma's adaptive playground equipment being an eyesore. Each citation came with a fine, and Sarah's modest savings began to dwindle. David Chin knocked on their door one evening, his face grim. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Margaret Wellington is targeting your family. She's been calling emergency HOA meetings, trying to get support to force you out." Sarah's hands trembled. "But we haven't done anything wrong. Emma just wants to play and be a normal kid." "I know, and most of us support you. But Margaret is relentless. She's talking about taking legal action if you don't comply with her demands." That night, Sarah cried herself to sleep while Emma slept peacefully beside her, unaware that their new beginning was turning into a nightmare. Margaret's harassment escalated when she realized Sarah wasn't going to give up easily. She began filing formal complaints with the city, claiming that Emma's presence was disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. She organized a petition, going door to door with her clipboard and her fake smile. "We need to maintain our standards," she told each neighbor. "I'm sure you understand. Property values are what matter here." But Margaret was surprised to find that most neighbors refused to sign. The Johnsons, who had lived there for 20 years, told her to leave their property. The young couple at the end of the street called her petition disgraceful. "That little girl brings more joy to this neighborhood than you ever have," Mrs. Johnson told her firmly. Margaret's face turned red with rage. If the neighbors wouldn't support her, she would find another way. She began documenting every moment Emma was outside. She took pictures of the little girl playing in her yard, measuring the decibel level of her laughter, timing how long her wheelchair stayed in any one spot. Sarah started to feel like a prisoner in her own home. She would peek through the curtains before letting Emma outside, making sure Margaret wasn't lurking around with her camera and measuring tape. "I don't want to play outside anymore, Mama," Emma said one afternoon. "The mean lady scares me." Sarah's heart shattered. Her daughter, who had faced countless medical challenges with such bravery, was now afraid to play in her own backyard. Margaret's next move was to file a lawsuit against the Martinez family, claiming they were violating multiple HOA covenants and damaging the community. She hired an expensive lawyer and demanded that Sarah pay thousands of dollars in fines or face eviction. Sarah sat in the small legal aid office, holding the lawsuit papers with shaking hands. The lawyer across from her, a tired-looking man named Mr. Patterson, reviewed the case with growing disgust. "This is clearly discriminatory harassment," he said. "But fighting it will be expensive and time-consuming. The HOA has deep pockets." "I can't afford to move again," Sarah whispered. "And I won't let that woman destroy my daughter's happiness. Emma loves it here. The other neighbors love her." "Then we fight," Mr. Patterson said, his voice growing stronger. "But I need you to document everything. Every interaction, every citation, every time she takes pictures of Emma. We need to show the pattern of harassment." That night, Sarah started a journal, writing down every cruel thing Margaret had done. As she wrote, her sadness turned to anger. How dare this woman try to destroy their lives? How dare she make Emma afraid to be a child? The court hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning. Sarah wheeled Emma into the courthouse, her heart pounding. Emma had insisted on coming, despite Sarah's protests. "I want to tell the judge that I'm a good girl, Mama," Emma had said with the wisdom of a child who had faced too much cruelty. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table with her expensive lawyer, wearing a navy blue suit and a smug expression. She had brought a thick folder of photos, measurements, and complaints. When Sarah's lawyer presented their defense, showing the pattern of harassment and discrimination, Margaret's face remained stone cold. She truly believed she was in the right. "Your Honor," Margaret's lawyer said, "my client is simply trying to maintain the standards that make Willowbrook Estates a desirable community. The defendants have consistently violated HOA rules." Mr. Patterson stood up. "Your Honor, what we have here is not rule enforcement, but systematic harassment of a disabled child and her mother. Mrs. Wellington has filed over 40 complaints in 4 months, all targeting this family." The judge reviewed the evidence, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Mrs. Wellington," the judge said, "I need to ask you directly. Do you believe that Emma Martinez has the same right to enjoy her home as any other child in your neighborhood?" Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "Your Honor, this isn't about the child personally. It's about maintaining standards. Some people simply don't belong in certain communities." A gasp went through the courtroom. Several neighbors who had come to support Sarah shook their heads in disgust. The judge was about to respond when Margaret, frustrated by what she saw as attacks on her position, did something that would change everything. She stood up abruptly, her face red with rage, and marched toward Sarah and Emma. "You people think you can just move wherever you want and ruin everything we've worked for," she screamed. Before anyone could react, Margaret raised her hand and slapped Emma across the face. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Emma's cry of pain and shock filled the air as Sarah immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter. "How dare you!" Sarah shouted, tears streaming down her face. "She's just a child." The courtroom erupted. The bailiff moved toward Margaret, the judge pounded his gavel, and neighbors stood up in outrage. But then, from the back of the courtroom, came a voice that cut through the chaos like ice. "Ma'am, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Everyone turned to see a man walking down the aisle of the courtroom. He was tall and lean, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. His movements were controlled and precise, like a predator approaching its prey. He wore a simple black suit, but there was something about him that commanded immediate respect and fear. As he walked, several people in the courtroom instinctively stepped back. He went directly to Emma, kneeling beside her wheelchair with infinite gentleness. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice warm as he spoke to his granddaughter. "Grandpa's here now." Emma's tears slowed as she looked into his familiar eyes. "Grandpa Jack? You came. I promised I would always protect you, didn't I?" he said, gently touching the red mark on her cheek where Margaret had struck her. Sarah looked at her father with a mixture of relief and concern. She hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, not since their argument about her wanting to live a normal life instead of accepting his protection and money. Jack Martinez, though that wasn't the name on his CIA identification, had spent 30 years in the intelligence service. He had been involved in operations that would never see the light of day, in places that didn't exist on any map. He had retired 5 years ago, but once you were part of that world, you never really left it. He stood up slowly and turned toward Margaret, who was now being restrained by the bailiff. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made the entire courtroom go silent, "I need you to understand something very clearly. You just struck my granddaughter." Margaret, despite being held by the bailiff, tried to maintain her arrogance. "And who are you supposed to be? Her bodyguard?" Jack smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone who has spent 3 decades learning how to find people who hurt innocent children. I'm someone who knows exactly how to make problems disappear." He took a step closer, and Margaret instinctively tried to back away. "I know your full name, Margaret and Wellington. I know you live at 1247 Maple Street. I know your social security number, your banking information, and your complete employment history. I know about your son David who lives in Seattle and works for Microsoft. I know about your elderly mother in the nursing home in Portland." Margaret's face went white. "How do you? I know that you've been embezzling money from the HOA funds for the past 3 years. I know about the offshore account you opened in the Cayman Islands. I know about the contractor kickbacks and the property tax evasion." The courtroom was dead silent. Margaret's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she seemed frozen. Jack continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "I know about your DUI from 2019 that mysteriously disappeared from your record after you paid someone $50,000. I know about the insurance fraud from 2021. "Stop," Margaret whispered, her arrogance completely gone. "Please stop." "I also know," Jack said, taking out his phone, "that 43 minutes ago, the FBI received an anonymous tip about HOA financial irregularities in Willowbrook Estates. They should be executing a search warrant on your home and office within the hour." Margaret collapsed into her chair, her face gray with terror. The judge, who had been watching this exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. "Mr. Martinez," Jack replied. "Though I go by several names depending on the circumstances. Mr. Martinez, while I understand your anger, I can't allow threats in my courtroom." Jack turned to the judge with respect. "Your Honor, I made no threats. I simply shared information. Mrs. Wellington is free to verify everything I said. As for the FBI investigation, that was already in motion before I arrived. I merely confirmed the timing." He was lying, of course. The FBI investigation had been initiated by a single phone call Jack had made from his car in the parking lot 20 minutes earlier. When you had spent 30 years building relationships in the intelligence community, you learned how to make things happen quickly. The judge looked at Margaret, who was now crying and whispering frantically with her lawyer. "Mrs. Wellington, do you wish to withdraw your lawsuit?" Margaret nodded desperately. "Yes, Your Honor. I withdraw all complaints against the Martinez family." "And you agree to cease all harassment of this family?" Yes, absolutely." The judge turned to Jack. "And you, Mr. Martinez?" "I want a formal apology to my granddaughter. And I want Mrs. Wellington to resign from the HOA board immediately." Margaret's lawyer started to protest, but Margaret cut him off. "I apologize," she said, her voice barely audible. "And I resign." "Louder," Jack said quietly, "so everyone can hear." Margaret stood up on shaking legs. "I formally apologize to Emma Martinez and her mother. I resign from the HOA board effective immediately." The judge nodded. "Case dismissed. Mrs. Wellington, you are banned from any further contact with the Martinez family. If you violate this order, you will face criminal charges." As the courtroom emptied, neighbors surrounded Sarah and Emma, offering hugs and support. Many of them had tears in their eyes, both from anger at what they had witnessed and relief that justice had been served. David Chin approached Jack with evident respect. "Sir, I don't know what you did, but thank you. That woman has been terrorizing this family for months." Jack shook his hand. "You and your wife are good people. Thank you for supporting my daughter and granddaughter when they needed it most." Sarah finally approached her father, Emma still in her arms. The little girl had stopped crying, but the red mark on her cheek remained. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice uncertain. "I'm sorry," Jack said immediately. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I'm sorry I let my pride keep me away when you needed me." Sarah broke down crying. "I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to prove I could take care of Emma without your help." "You did," Jack said firmly. "You fought for your daughter every step of the way. You never gave up. I'm proud of you." Emma reached out from her mother's arms toward her grandfather. "Grandpa Jack, will you stay with us now?" Jack took his granddaughter gently, holding her as if she were made of precious crystal. "If your mama wants me to, sweetheart, that if she'll have me." "Please stay," Sarah whispered. "We need you. I need you." Over the following weeks, the truth about Margaret Wellington came out in a series of local newspaper articles that Jack had anonymously provided information for. The FBI investigation revealed years of financial misconduct, and she was arrested on federal charges. The story became national news when someone leaked the courtroom video showing Margaret slapping a disabled child. The video went viral, with millions of views and universal condemnation. Margaret's life unraveled completely. She lost her house, her savings, and her reputation. Her son in Seattle refused to speak to her, and she was eventually sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. But the real changes happened in Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood rallied around the Martinez family like never before. David Chin was elected as the new HOA president, and his first act was to eliminate all the petty rules that Margaret had used to torment families. Emma's adaptive playground equipment became the centerpiece of a new community playground that was built with donations from neighbors. The little girl who had been told her laughter was too loud became the sound of joy that everyone looked forward to hearing. 6 months later, Sarah sat on her front porch, watching Emma play in the yard with 3 neighbor children. Her daughter's laughter filled the air, no longer something to be hidden but something to be celebrated. Jack had moved into the guest room, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly safe. Not just because her father could protect them from people like Margaret, but because she had learned she was stronger than she ever knew. "Mama, look," Emma called out, pointing to the butterfly garden they had planted together. The butterflies came back. Sarah smiled, tears of happiness in her eyes. The butterflies had indeed come back, just like hope had returned to their lives. David Chin walked over from next door holding a letter. "Sarah, this came to the HOA office. It's from a legal aid organization. They want to feature Emma's case in their newsletter about fighting discrimination." Sarah took the letter, reading it with growing amazement. "They want to help other families facing similar harassment. Your daughter's courage inspired a lot of people," David said. "That video of her in court telling the judge she just wanted to be a good girl, it broke hearts and changed minds." Jack joined them on the porch, carrying a tray of lemonade. "How's my favorite granddaughter doing today?" "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa." Emma giggled. "That makes you even more special," Jack replied, ruffling her hair gently. As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, Sarah realized that sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Margaret's cruelty had revealed the true character of their neighbors and brought her family back together. 1 year later, Emma Martinez rolled across the stage at the community center, receiving an award for Outstanding Young Citizen from the mayor. Her smile was so bright it seemed to light up the entire room. In the audience, Sarah wiped away tears of pride as she watched her daughter, who had once been told she didn't belong, being celebrated as an inspiration to the entire community. Jack sat beside her, his own eyes moist. "She's going to change the world, you know," he whispered to his daughter. "She already has," Sarah replied. Margaret Wellington was a distant memory now, serving her sentence and forgotten by the community she had tried so hard to control. But Emma Martinez was remembered every day, in the laughter that echoed through the neighborhood, in the playground where all children played together, and in the hearts of neighbors who had learned that true community isn't about perfect lawns and property values. It's about protecting and celebrating the most vulnerable among us. As Emma gave her acceptance speech, her words were simple but profound. "Thank you for letting me belong here. Thank you for showing me that being different makes me special, not wrong. And thank you for teaching me that when good people stand together, mean people can't win." The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. In the back of the room, several other families with disabled children watched and took hope. They had moved to Willowbrook Estates specifically because they had heard about the community that stood up for Emma Martinez. David Chin, still serving as HOA president, had implemented new rules that actually mattered. Kindness was mandatory, inclusion was required, and anyone who tried to harm a child would face the full force of a community united in love. Jack Martinez had found a new purpose in retirement. He now volunteered with legal aid organizations, using his unique skills to help families facing discrimination and harassment. He had discovered that protecting innocent children was just as important in civilian life as it had been in his CIA career. And Sarah had returned to school, studying law with the goal of becoming an advocate for families like hers. Emma's case had shown her that she was stronger than she ever imagined, and she wanted to help others find that same strength. But the most important change was in Emma herself. The shy, frightened child who had been afraid to play in her own backyard had grown into a confident, joyful girl who knew she was loved and valued exactly as she was. Her laughter still filled the neighborhood every day. But now, instead of complaints, it brought smiles to every face that heard it. Because sometimes, the most beautiful sound in the world is simply the sound of a child being allowed to be happy. 5 years later, the Emma Martinez Act was passed in their state, making HOA discrimination against disabled individuals a felony. The law was inspired by Emma's case and signed by the governor on Emma's 13th birthday. Margaret Wellington was released from prison but left the state immediately, her name forever associated with cruelty and intolerance. Emma had become a national advocate for disabled children's rights, speaking at conferences and schools across the country. Her message was always the same: every child deserves to belong somewhere. Every child deserves to laugh. And in Willowbrook Estates, on a small plaque by the community playground, were engraved these words: in honor of Emma Martinez, who taught us that a community's strength is measured not by its rules, but by its kindness. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the playground every day, and everyone who heard it remembered the little girl who had fought for the right to be happy. She had won.